Howdy, folks. In today's episode, we'll talk about how to protect your work and your rights in an era of image theft, social media sharing, and AI-generated content. And who better to talk to about this than one of the most legendary rock photographers of all time, right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. We've spent literally hundreds of hours interviewing some of the most renowned photographers of our time, giving you access to knowledge and expertise that's not available anywhere else. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and if you're like me and you love free podcasts and YouTube content, consider supporting the show by buying us a coffee over on buymeacoffee.com/Camera Shake. And I'm saying that because YouTube really doesn't pay anything. It really does make a difference. So, before we dive in, make sure you sign up for our newsletter at www.camerashakepodcast.com for the latest news and some upcoming goodies too. There's some really cool stuff coming up, so make sure you hop over there and do that. Now, without further ado, though, let's welcome the man who literally shot hundreds of album covers and magazine covers, toured with Van Halen and just about every major rock band you can imagine. I grew up with his images when I was sweating over Van Halen guitar licks, the one and only Neil Zlozower. Slows, man, how's it going?
Going good, Kirsten. I'm sitting here talking to you, so how bad couldn't it be?
It could get a hell of a lot worse. You could not be talking to me.
It may by the end of the interview. Who knows?
Hey, man, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Because I tell you what, I saw your documentary on YouTube, and I'm saying this, everything we talk about, the links are available in the description of this episode, so make sure you check that out. But there's a fully fledged documentary about you and your work over on YouTube, which I highly recommend because it is absolutely hilarious. How did that actually happen? How did that whole documentary thing come together?
Well, I'm pretty low-key type of guy in my older years, but this Austrian documentary filmmaker was doing a guitar documentary, and these two Japanese sisters that play bass and guitar, they contacted me and they were like, "Oh, Neil, they're doing documentary and they want to get Eddie Van Halen." I'm like, "Look, girls, it's not going to happen." They go, "What do you mean?" I go, "Eddie's not going to do it." This is when Ed was alive, obviously. So I said, "Look, you girls don't need the headache. Just put the director, producer, whatever, in touch with me." So he was in Austria. He had a girl out here. She contacted me. She told me that Declan, who has a company called Rattlesnake Productions over in Austria, he is a tattoo artist and he's a documentary filmmaker, and he was doing this guitar documentary and he was coming to town. So the girl here, his assistant, asked me if I'd like to meet with him for lunch or dinner. I said, sure. So we met for lunch or dinner. We got along great. And, I'm sort of a character in my own right. So I guess he took a liking to me. I took a liking to him. I watched this tattoo documentary, which is sort of army style. It wasn't all really well lit and really well produced. It was available light. It was grainy. It was nasty. It was just right up my alley. So we met one more time. And then I think this third time we met, he's like, "Neil, I got an idea for my next documentary." I go, "What's that?" He goes, I want to do a documentary on you. I go, "Me? Why do you want to do a documentary on me?" He goes, "Well, you're legendary and you're famous and everybody knows that you are. So, I always thought about doing something, but, I really like to stay behind the camera. I don't like to be in the limelight too much like some other photographers I know who have big egos. But, so we decided to do it. So then I called up my friends like Billy Sheehan and Slash and Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and Ralph from Steel Panthers and Michael Anthony and John Five and Frankie Bello and Carmine Appice and Scott Ian and Henry Rollins and Paul Stanley and Nuno Bednar. And they all were in my documentary and, talked about me, and they're all ragging and bagging on me in my documentary in a good way. Because I didn't want, "Oh yeah, Neil, he's the greatest rock photographer that ever lived. He's so nice." I wanted all the dirt. I wanted all the bad stuff. I wanted to hear the Zlozower stories, which if I toured with their band. They would have some good Zlozower stories, to say the least. So, and that's pretty much what, we got. Plus, on top of that, my kids in it, my ex-wife's in it, my girlfriend's in there, my makeup artist, my assistants are in there. My first photography partner, Todd Gray, who I started shooting photos with when we were like 15, 16 years old. He's in there. So I must say, I couldn't have asked for a better documentary. And I love what Declan and his, wife, Beate did. They did a great job. So I'm very happy with it. It's old news now. It's probably 3-4 years old, but it's a great documentary.
I thought it was wild. I tell you what actually really struck me. Well, first of all, I've realized that I have literally grown up with your imagery. As a kid, learning how to play guitar, like literally through, my teens, my 20s, and my 30s, and to a degree to my 40s, I completely grew up with your images. And when I watched your documentary, it just occurred to me that virtually, like, every guitar magazine I had, every guitar tab book, or method books, like, Joe Satriani's Guitar Secrets, which was like the Bible, when I was growing up, to Steve Vai's Alien Love Secrets, all these things that I've been, sweating over, Van Halen too, the famous photos for that. It's just unbelievable. And I never realized as a kid that, they were all shot by the same person, which is you, which is, why for me personally, it's incredible to have you on the show. It was a real, and the funniest thing, I tell you the funniest thing about this though, there's a scene in the documentary where Steve Vai talks about your emails. And he goes like, well, if you ever got an email, from Zlozower, you know it because it's all capital letters and like a million exclamation marks. And I'm looking at my email inbox. It was after I emailed you, you responded. I'm like, I got that email. I've got that email.
I like to use a lot of exclamation marks to get the point across in my emails. I'm a very excitable guy, but one exclamation mark, that doesn't mean anything. I just wrote some guy Getty Images, really nice guy, Jonathan, an email, and he wanted me to be with Getty. I basically said I wouldn't be with Getty if it was the last photo agency in the world. And there were probably 20 exclamation marks after each sentence. It was only 3 sentences, but there were 60 exclamation marks in that whole email. There were more exclamation marks than actually letters in the email. So, but actually, I just spoke to him yesterday when Ozzy died. And Jonathan's a great guy. I don't think very highly of Getty, but Jonathan's a great professional guy. So,
yeah, that was a big shocker. And in fact, you emailed me yesterday, and literally, I had literally just opened my phone and saw the news coming in that Ozzy had died. I'm like, oh God, plus he's only just, 2 weeks ago, played his last gig. Unbelievable. Now, just for context, we are going to talk about, how you can retain, like how you can protect your work, as a photographer nowadays because of everything that's going on. But just for context, and also just for my own interest, I think some of your most famous work, if I don't know how you even quantify that, but is some of the work that you did for Van Halen, the Van Halen 2 album. How did you first get to know the band originally? Because you've been shooting them for a very, very long time, like really since the beginning, really.
Well, I actually didn't latch on to Van Halen till Van Halen 1 was already out. And I was in an office one day, I've told the story a billion times, on the radio, and they used to have decent radio back in the Stone Age. I heard this song. It was the beginning of Running with the Devil with the air raid siren, the Michael boom, 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 boom. And then I heard Dave's voice. And, I like the raunchy, nasty voices. I mean, I like the pretty voices like David Coverdale, who's a great singer. But, I'm an Ian Gillan, Bon Scott, David Lee Roth. I don't like to really, I'm not a big Freddie Mercury voice type of guy or whatever. It's just too pretty. Or Steve Perry from Journey. I mean, they're great singers, just not my cup of tea. So, and then I heard after Running with the Devil, Eruption came in, and then you really got me. I'm like, I got to work with this band. But for all the photographers out there, since this is a photography program, my motto was always, you got to try to tell what band is going to be big later on. You got to have the ears to hear something and go, wow, I want to work with this band. I think they're going to rise to the top and be huge. So I've done that with a ton of bands in my day. I did it with Tom Petty. I did it I was going to say David Bowie, but I wasn't really a Ziggy Stardust guy. I liked him later, better on later. But Black Oak, Arkansas, if anybody even knows who they are, they were huge back in the day. But Robin Trower, and then we got to bands like, Deep Purple. Ian Gillan's one of my favorite singers. But first time I heard Van Halen, I said, they're going to be huge. I want to work with them. And a friend of mine was their publicist, and me and another photographer, we were shooting Texas Jam in 1978, and Van Halen was there, and they were one of the opening bands. And we had clearance to shoot all the bands on stage. It's about 110 degrees. I'm on stage 10 minutes before Van Halen's coming on, and all of a sudden this little 5'5" guy comes up to me. Black leather coat, black leather pants, handcuffs, billy club, Mason his thing. Peter Fonda, Easy Rider, sunglasses. He's like, what are you doing on stage? I'm like, well, my name's Neil, and I'm hired by the promoters to shoot all the bands, and I have clearance to be anywhere I need to be and shoot bands on it. Well, that may be great for everybody else, but you don't have clearance for Van Halen, so get the fuck off my stage. I'm like, oh. So I went in the audience, and I saw them play, and I was like, oh, my God, this band's going to be huge. So I went back to L.A. They were doing 2 more shows, one in Long Beach, one in San Diego, towards the end of their 78 tour. My friend was their publicist. I called him up. He said, yeah, I could shoot the shows. And back then, when you were a photographer, you could shoot the whole show. It wasn't 3 songs from the soundboard or, 30 seconds from the soundboard like it is now. So I shot the 2 shows. The band needed to approve the photo, so we all met in my friend Bob Gibson's office. They looked here. They all came in. Ed, Al, Mike, Dave were all there. They looked at the photos. They loved them. I don't think they really ever had a real photographer shoot them before. And then 2 weeks later, they were playing a gig in Oakland, Day on the Green. Bill Graham used to put those on. They were second band on the bill, and I went up there. I did my very first impromptu backstage photo shoot with the band. And the rest was history. But, we were all the same age. We used to like the same thing. We used to like to party. We used to like, chicks. We used to like drinking or whatever. We like cars. I wasn't into motorcycles then, but that changed later on in my life. But so we all got along fine. And when they used to live around Pasadena, when they were in town, they just come knocking on my apartment door out of the blue. They didn't even call and say we're in the hood. So we were all one big family. I mean, I still talk to Al all the time. I see Michael here and there, not too often. He doesn't live very close. Dave's somewhere else these days. I don't know what Dave's doing. I don't even know if Dave knows what he's doing at this day and age. But, love the guy. Van Halen was one of the greatest American rock bands of all time, period.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest rock bands in general, I think, of all time.
Yeah, well, yeah, but once again, my motto is always trying to hear a band when they were nobodies and going, this band's going to be big. Did it with Ted Nugent, did it with Aerosmith, did it with Quiet Riot, did it with Van Halen, did it with Poison, did it with Rat, did it with Guns N' Roses, and I started with all those bands when they were pretty much, nothings. And when they worked their way to the top, I worked my way to the top with them.
Now, I went to obviously I had a look at your agency website, Atlas Icons, and it's I tell you what, one of the most useful features on there is the search function on it, because literally the list of bands that you have worked with is just never ending. It's just unbelievable.
Well, 2 things. Atlas Icons is my photo agency that I own, along with my longtime photographer friend, Eddie Maluk, who's a East Coast photographer. And, we've been friends for 30, maybe 40 years. I don't even know how long, but it was his idea to start the photo agency, just like Getty and just like Shutterstock, where people in the business could go and license photos for documentary and magazines and so on. But we handle about 10 or 15 other photographers. So all those photos on Atlas are not 100% mine, okay? We have Jeff Mayer, and we have William Hames, and we got, people that maybe people have heard of. I mean, most people out there probably don't even know who I am, to be honest with you. If I called up a record company today and some dumb, stupid secretary answered the phone, I go, yeah, I want to talk to so-and-so. They go, yeah, can I tell them what company you're calling from? I'm like, just tell them I'm on the phone. You don't need to know what company I'm from, okay? They know me for 15 years. Just tell them I'm on the phone. The people in this day and age are so clueless and, sort of appalling,
What made you first think about setting up your own agency rather than, let's say, joining an agency like Getty, which, you speak to a lot of photographers and that's kind of, the way they think about what made you think, I might as well just set up my own agency?
Well, honestly, we had this lawyer, myself and Eddie Maluk. His name was David Atlas. And unfortunately, and we loved him. He was an amazing lawyer. This was probably from 2005 to 2010. And unfortunately, he suffered a massive heart attack on a subway in New York, and he died really young. And we loved him so much, we wanted to keep his name alive. So we tried to think of a name for an agency. And, before that, Eddie came up to me. I was back in New York for something, staying at Eddie's apartment. And he's like, why don't we start a photo agency? Because that was the wave of the future. Okay. Now, I'm 70 years old. I'm old school. I was still, even back in 2010, living the old way. Okay. The new way was everybody needs every photo in a half an hour. I was living in the world where, like, if someone said, okay, we need Judas Priest and Motley Crue and Led Zeppelin, I would go to my files. I'd pull out 20 Motley Crue shots and 20 Judas Priest slides and 20 Led Zeppelin and 20 Van Halen. And then I'd FedEx them to the magazine, which means they'd get them tomorrow. Well, that's too late. First of all, they don't even want to pay to use a photo. They want to, so they don't want to pay for FedEx, let alone pay to use a photo or pay a photographer to do a photo shoot. In this day and age, everybody wants everything for free. There's no money anymore being a photographer. So the thing is, my business was going down the tubes by 2010, 11, because I was living the old way. So people weren't really even calling me anymore. So Eddie, who's a little bit more younger than me, came up with the idea, hey, Neil, why don't we start a photo agency? I'm like, a photo agency? I'm like, not like a photo agency owner. I'm a photographer. I don't want to be the big cheese and own something and deal with that shit. But it made sense, and Eddie's a great guy. So I decided, okay, let's give it a try. So, for the next 5-6 years, day and night, I was scanning all my archives of my photos and digitizing them and putting them up and building Atlas icons, at least what I could build on my end. Plus, we were going out looking for new talent to add to Atlas icons. So that's how the photo agency started. And it's a good thing that Eddie did come up with this idea, because I'd probably still be living in the past and sending out slides and expecting the client to pay for the FedEx, which is, $50. They don't even want to pay to use a photo, let alone pay for postage to get a slide there, And now the good thing about it also is I don't have to send out my original slides and risk some idiot in some office who has no respect for your intellectual property damaging it or spilling coffee on it or whatever.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. part about where innovation never sleeps. When you told me this the other day, actually, when we were talking on the phone, I immediately thought, well, that's quite a risky thing. You're sending out your transparencies or your slides. You get, you got to make sure that you get them back undamaged. And, that's nowadays in this sort of digital world, and in many ways, it's easier on one hand, but of course, attitudes have changed towards photography. I think, generally from the end user's perspective and in the industry in general, just like, attitudes have changed when it comes to photographers in general, like attitudes towards gear, for example. A lot of photographers nowadays obsess about gear. This is what I hear all the time. It's gear, this camera, that camera, blah, blah, blah. I autofocus this and that and whatever. And, I spend my time, when I talk to people at camera clubs or whatever, saying, well, just because you shoot a camera body that's 10 years old doesn't mean, 10 years ago, there were people out there that created amazing photos. 20 years ago, they created amazing photos. How much did gear really matter back in the day compared to today? Or did it, was that ever a thing back in the heydays?
Well, I was a film photographer most of my career. I didn't switch over to digital till about 2006. And one of my best friends owned one of the biggest labs in the world. And he's like, Neil, one day you're going to be digital. One day I'm going to be digital. I'm like, look, I'm never going digital. But I had to change with the times because, once again, the clients don't even want to pay to use a photo or to pay to hire a photographer. They don't want to pay for the film and process it. So finally, in 2006, I switched over to digital. But most of my iconic Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, Van Halen, Led Zeppelin, they were all shot with film. Okay. And honestly, now they have these mirrorless SLR cameras, which I don't have. The last digital camera that I used was a Canon 5D Mark I. Okay, they're probably on Canon 5D Mark 2000s right now. Okay, they made 2000. I use a Canon 5D Mark I. The images were something like 12, 14 megapixels. I think now the images are 50 megapixels, but I used to, they have a show here every year called the NAMM Show where they sometimes put up life-size posters at Gibson or Fender, like here's Slash, like life size, 5 feet high of Slash with his Gibson Les Paul, or here's Zach Wilde or whoever, and they would use my photos and blow them up 5, 6 feet. And they never said, Neil, you really need to buy a newer digital camera because your quality is not cutting it. Like I said, if you go on my website, there's over 800 magazine covers. Most of them are film, and most of them I scanned myself. And, well, not the old ones, because I'd have to send film back then, and the magazines would get them scanned, whoever did the work. But, you could give me any camera, and I could shoot a great photo, I think, even though I'm pretty rusty now because I don't shoot photos anymore. I have no desire to ever pick up a camera again as long as I live, period.
You've seen the music industry evolve through some pretty turbulent times, from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to Napster, and I remember all of that. And when was that? The early 2000s? Was that when Napster happened and the whole Metallica cookies?
Yeah, I think it was in the 90s.
Or 90s even, yeah. How did that change the way you worked when, as the music industry was changing so dramatically? What impact did that have on what you were doing at the time?
Well, what is this? Like I said, I'm 70 years old. Throughout my 55 plus years, because I started in 69, believe me, I've had to reinvent myself many, many times. Okay. In the early 70s, I was a young kid living at my parents' house. I didn't have expenses. And then I think at 77, I moved out. Those are sort of turbulent years. But, back in the 80s, for instance, with all the hair bands, people knew who I was because of Van Halen and Quiet Riot and probably Rat and whatever. But so, I could get access to most of the bands, but I would hire an assistant and I would have to pay for the film and processing. And the studio I'm at right now, where we're doing this interview, I've been at since 1979. Fortunately, now I own the building. I was smart enough to buy it, which I overpaid at the time, and now it's worth 20 times what I paid for it. But so back then, I paid for all the expenses, and I would own the photos, But back then, there was like 50 American rock magazines. So if you did a photo shoot with Motley Crue or Bon Jovi or Rat or Poison, I mean, and the people may out there laugh right now when I mention Rat or Poison or Why Riot. In their day, they could do no wrong. They sold millions and millions of records, all those bands. No one sells millions of records anymore. Everybody's download. Records don't sell anymore. So the thing is, I was making tons and tons of money. Things changed when Metallica came into the picture. Okay. So all the hair bands, all of a sudden the hairspray was gone, and all the bands like Poison and Rat, Quiet Riot went to clothing designers to make their stage outfits. All of a sudden it's jeans and t-shirts and black leather pants. And then when Guns N' Roses really broke in late 86, early 87, Metallica was a little different genre of music. But when Guns N' Roses broke, that was more rock and roll than Metallica. Metallica was like Slayer and Metallica and Pantera. That was the beginning of sort of grunge. Okay. So all of a sudden, things started changing and everything was good for a while. But then when Nirvana and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains hit, that was a very dreadful period, at least for my business, because those bands didn't want to, they would do photo shoots, but they wouldn't look at you. They would ignore you. They'd be like, look, we're going to fucking ignore you. We're going to talk to each other. Just shoot pictures. So who wants people talking like this? When I used to shoot the bands like Bon Jovi or Rat, it was always like, look at me. I'm a fucking rock star. I could do no fucking wrong. Okay. And yeah, we're going to get laid tonight. And actually, my little, when bands would come to my studio and I shoot them, it wasn't just get them on the backdrop. Nowadays, the photographers I see shoot people with digital cameras because there's no film and process. It's just click, 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 click. There's no interaction. The photographers don't even have any personality. If I was like someone like Slash or something, I'd be like, do I look okay? This photographer's not giving me any feedback. I don't know if I'm doing okay. I mean, the guy's like, does he have a tongue? Can the guy talk? I don't know. He's not saying anything to me. So I'd be, they get up in my studio and they'd be coming out of makeup and we'd be all cool, drinking Mickey's Big Mouse or whatever was the vice at the time. And then they get on the backdrop and then I'd go into Zloz mode and I'd be like, okay, listen to me, guys. Your fucking record just went triple platinum. You got two sold out shows at the Forum the next 2 days. And that's how I used to get my attitude. That's why I think back in the day, if you looked at his Zloz photo, you get some type of feeling. I mean, throughout my career, many Zloz fans would come up to me like, Neil, I could always tell one of your photos. We'd be looking through Cream or Circus or Hip Radar, and we get to this photo by some other guy. We get to this photo by some other guy. We get to one of your photos, and we can tell that was one of your photos. And like I said, I always told the bands, okay, you guys, my attitude was, I want the rock bands to get laid by chicks. And there's even an interview with Dave Ellefson from Megadeth somewhere on the internet who was talking about how I got him laid so many times, because I made him look like a bass god in, Megadeth. So
I think generally, for portrait photographers, and I find this a lot of time when I do workshops, is one of the biggest issues that people have very often is just communicating with their subject, just basically getting that other human being to react in some way. And I find that's actually one of the hardest things to teach in many ways, because a lot of people have that personality that sort of makes it easy. But if you don't have that, it's kind of tricky, I guess, unless you're good at adapting.
Well, the thing is, look, you got to realize all these people, whether it's Nikki Sixx or Gene Simmons or David Lee Roth, they're human beings just like everybody else. They shit, they get sick. they have problems with their husbands or their wives or whatever. They get pimples on their face. They get lines and wrinkles. I mean, they're no different. They're just in the limelight and they're escalated to a platform above most other normal everyday people that you meet. They sold out shows to 20,000 people, whether it's, Taylor Swift or whoever it is. So when you're a photographer, you got to shoot one of these people. Maybe you're a little nervous and scared to deal with them because you think the guy's just like, oh my God, that's Eddie Van Halen. But in reality, they're no different than me or you, So, and like I said, I always tried to, at one time in my earlier years of becoming a photographer, I wanted to be the best or one of the best rock photographers on the planet. And you can't do that if you're a little shy, meek, timid person when you're shooting these people, and you watch my thing, like Stephen Pearcy's like, yeah, he was one of us. He drank, he partied, he got the chicks like us, blah, blah, blah. And, I'm more like a rock star really inside than just, a normal human being, So.
You've known some of those bands you've known for a long time. Like, again, like Van Halen as an example. And, you said earlier, you still talk to Michael Anthony and and Al and some people in the band. Now, in what way would you say have they changed over the years, or did you sort of witness a change, or did they at the core of it just stay the same all the way through?
Well, now in my older years, I was born Jewish, believe it or not, at a bar mitzvah. Meant absolutely nothing to me. Okay. In about 2003, I had a girlfriend. She lived in Thailand. Sort of got me interested in Buddhism. So one thing I learned from Buddha right here is everything changes. Nothing stays the same. And if it's good, it's not always going to be good. And if it's bad, it's not always going to be bad. As a matter of fact, you watch my documentary, I have about 4 different girls saying, yeah, everything changes. Like Susie said it. Sandy said it. My girlfriend Kyoko said it. Pussycat said it. There's Pussycat there. She's no longer with us, unfortunately. So, but I do have her dog, which is basically like my girlfriend in life these days. But everything changes. So, Nikki Sixx, he was one of my closest friends in the world. Me and Robin Crosby and Nikki Sixx in 1984, we went to Club Med in Martinique together. The Nikki Sixx that's on this planet now is not the Nikki Sixx I knew in 1983 to 1991, but the Zlozower that Nikki knew in 1983 to 1991. That's not the same Zloz now either. I'm old. I think I've mellowed a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. Yeah.
Well, if your motorcycle's anything to go by, it doesn't look like you've mellowed a lot.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, I wasn't in motorcycles back then, but I don't ride that much. I got a few cars here that I drive, but those are like my baby. Those are like my family. They're pieces. My motorcycles are pieces of art. They aren't new. They're all old, and I was just walking in today. Most of them are all covered up, and there's 4 that are uncovered. And I was like, these things are fucking beautiful. I mean, if you gave me a Rembrandt or a Picasso or something like that, I forgot the guy I went to, Van Gogh in Amsterdam. I was there. I couldn't wait to get the fuck out of that museum and go drink a Heineken. So, but if you gave me a Rembrandt or a Van Gogh or something like that, if I ran out of toilet paper and had to wipe my ass, I'd probably pull it off the wall and wipe my butt with it. Those things to me are the ugliest things I've ever seen. I wouldn't even want one of those hanging in my living room,
If you had to start out now in 2025, like if you had to start your career again, would you still pick up a camera or would you do something completely different?
I wouldn't even think of being a photographer in this day and age. First of all, if anybody thinks they could actually make a real living by shooting photos in this day and age, they're on some good drugs. Please give me some of those drugs, okay? Because they must be really, really good. So no, photography right now to me is the most unrespected, worthless profession on this planet. No one cares about photography. I mean, anybody with a good iPhone can shoot good photos in this day and age, period. That's all there is to it. I don't shoot photos anymore, but I have an iPhone 7 and I've shot photos with it. I've made 11 by 14 prints to hang on my wall of my dog or whatever, and they look great. The iPhone 7 is not even an iPhone 50 or 60, whatever they're on now, you know? So,
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, social media is literally turned everyone into a photographer. You know, social media and smartphones, so to say.
uh,
Um, I mean, what is your honest opinion on things like Instagram? You know, because you can go on Instagram and you can type in like, you know, rock photography or something, and it comes up with like a million, not even 2 million, 10 million different accounts and images. What's your honest opinion on those kind of social media platforms?
well, I never, ever, ever go to Facebook, period. You know, I have all these people, you know, I send your friends requests on Facebook, or what do they call it? I am you on Facebook. Don't bother because I'll never see it. Okay. Sometimes I go to Facebook Marketplace to sell car parts or motorcycle parts, or I actually have my softbox for sale right now that I use for 50% of all my iconic photos. It's for sale on Facebook, but no one wants that anymore, those type of lights. Okay. But Instagram, sometimes I'm laying in bed, I go there because they have some of the hottest chicks I've ever seen in my life. There, forget Playboy and all that shit. But the problem is nowadays, you don't know if the chicks you're looking at are AI or if they're actually a real girl or not. But honestly, on Instagram, when I search, most of the places I go are the monkey sites. I love the animal sites. I go to the English bulldog sites. I probably am subscribed to about 20 monkey sites, which I think is the greatest thing. I'm a big animal lover, animal fanatic, and then I go to a lot of car and motorcycle sites. I go to a lot of food sites. I never go to any photography sites on Instagram, but you know, there's amazing photos up there, especially of scantily clad girls, you know, which is always nice to look at. It doesn't interest me that much these days, but you know, the monkeys, I really like the monkey sites and the animal sites, you know.
Do you think that things like Instagram, for example, I mean, maybe Instagram in particular, but social media in general, do you think that's really the cause of photography not being valued as much? You know, it's turned photography into such a commodity, like it's such a, you know, readily available thing.
No, honestly, I think what changed photography was digital. Okay. I mean, in certain ways, it's great. But, you know, back in the heyday when it was film and someone saying, "Neil, what do you do?" "Well, I'm a photographer." "Oh, my God, that's so cool. What do you shoot?" "I'm in the music industry. I shoot rock." "Oh, God, I wish, you know, I could do that." And, you know, then digital came and that made it affordable to put a camera in everybody's hand. And there was no film and processing. I mean, back in the day, I used to charge $30 a roll to buy the film, have a snip test done where they'd cut off 5 or 6 frames and go, "It's too light, make it darker, too dark, make it lighter," and then develop the other 31 frames on the roll, or depending if it was 6x7, 9 frames on the roll. Nowadays, people just look on the back of their camera, "Oh, it's too light, let's make it darker." They don't even do that. They just put everything on automatic. I mean, I'd say 95% of the photographers out there, if you gave them a film camera, wouldn't even know how to open the back. And then if they did open the back, they wouldn't know how to load the film. And then they wouldn't know. Says, like in my documentary, someone was like, "Hey, Neil, when you do a studio shoot in your studio, how do you know what to put the camera in?" I'm like, "Well, you use a flash meter, duh." You know,
Yeah.
it's like people, they don't even know how to use a light meter anymore. Okay. So anybody can just buy a high-end digital camera. I mean, and just put it on automatic. And nowadays, there's back in my day when automatic cameras started coming in, which I never used, you could either put it on aperture priority or shutter priority. Now you can put it on ISO priority. So when I used to shoot like these little piece of shit clubs like the Whiskey or the Troubadour and the lighting sucked, you were lucky. The highest film speed you could buy back then was 1600. You could maybe push it one stop to 3200, and you'd have grain the size of golf balls and stuff like that. Now you can take your ISO and put it on 30, 40, 50,000, and you could get an acceptable photo with absolutely zero light that you could never, ever capture on film. So they made it so easy. One day I was talking to Sammy from a camera shop called Sammy's Camera, who's one of the innovator camera store owners, proprietors of all time. Sammy unfortunately passed away about 8 months ago, and he was a good close friend of mine. And one day I was talking to Sam on the phone. I'm like, "Hey, Sam, how's business?" He's okay. And then out of the blue, he goes, "Digital wrecked everything." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, digital wrecked everything." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "We used to sell millions and millions of dollars of film every single year." He made it sound like he would be lucky if they sold $50,000 a year worth of film. No one does that anymore. Everybody wants the convenience. You can use a digital memory card over and over and over and over. So, nowadays the photographers were with film. You used to have to call your shots and really, you couldn't waste, film and processing was expensive. You couldn't do the same thing now where you could just, these people want these digital cameras that do 20 frames a second. Well, with a film camera, if you did that, it would cost you thousands of dollars to get your film processed. Like I said, no one wants to pay for the film and processing, let alone they don't want to even pay to use your photos anymore. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I spoke to a camera store chain in the Midwest. And that it's really interesting. This is one of the few chains that's still expanding across a number of states. When a lot of these sort of photo store, camera store chains are folding, over in the US as much as over here in the UK, they said exactly the same thing. Back in the day, people had to buy a camera and lenses and all the rest of it, and speed lights, but they also had to buy film, and then they had to drop the film back to be processed and developed. So that was another cost. So as a camera store, you would make a lot of money on the film and the processing, and all of that's gone now. So you're immediately losing, whatever it is, you're 50% of your business. It's hard to survive that.
Oh yeah. Well, you have it in the UK too. Now you got Amazon. People don't even have to leave their house to go, "I just bought some baby shampoo for whatever hair I have left, and I bought some Neutrogena soap, and I buy motorcycle parts on Amazon and car parts and things from my house." You don't even, all the stores. I mean, I feel sorry. I don't, you may have Costco. Do you have Costco in the UK?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but can you imagine how much inventory a store like that has to lay out to keep in business? Whether it's you got to have this coffee bean and that coffee bean and this candy and that candy and, this type of dishwashing detergent. I mean, I learned when I was younger, I worked at my dad's liquor store. And I realized back then you never want to own a business where you have to stock product to stay in business. You have to have quarts of Jack Daniels, fifths of Jack Daniels, half pints of Jack Daniels, pints of Jack Daniels, and that's only one type of bourbon. You have to have 30 other bourbons and 30 vodkas and 30 this. It's like, no, I learned right then, never own any type of business where you got to stock product.
And, Costco have it sewn up, though, because there's a great documentary on Netflix, actually, about Costco. You know that they make a loss on all the products that they sell. And yet they are...
Wait, I didn't hear. They do what? They make a lot of their products?
Yeah, they make a loss on all of the products that they sell. Yeah, so they make a loss on all the products that they sell. And yet they're the most profitable supermarket chain in the world. And the way they do it, what they make money on is memberships. That's the clever thing. They make all their money on the memberships, and they take a loss on all of the products that they sell. It's unbelievable. Like, the most popular product at Costco is water. Well, I mean,
water?
Yeah, it's just, water bottles. That's it. That's the most popular thing. Everything else, they sell off so cheap that they make a loss on everything. But the memberships is where they just rolling it in,
2 days ago, I just paid my Costco membership for the next year.
Yeah.
It was $60 last year. It went up $5 to $65. But if they have, 10 million, clients, and they make $5 extra, that's $50 million extra a year.
Yeah. Maybe that's the way to monetize your photos. It's like, as an agency, you just sell memberships.
Well, that's what they do. A lot of the magazines, like I used to sell a lot of photos to Classic Rock magazine in the UK, but they have a subscription to Getty, so they pay them whatever a year or a month, but they can use as many photos as they want. And most of the photo agencies, honestly, they don't give a flying fuck about the photographer. I mean, so they just care if they can make 3 cents off someone's photo. They'll pay the photographer 2 cents and they make a penny. It's a penny in their pocket. It's so they rely on quantity, but they really don't care about the photographer's rights or anything as long as they can make money.
How does Atlas Icons operate differently from other photo agencies?
Well, most of the other agencies, and I won't get into names and stuff, the ones I know of, they basically almost give away the photos, at least as far as I'm concerned. But myself and my partner, Eddie, we call Atlas a boutique agency. Okay. So for instance, we have stuff that you just aren't going to find on Getty or Shutterstock or whatever, Alame or whatever it is. I mean, we have, to me, the best Van Halen archive on the planet. And same thing with Motley Crue, and same thing with bands like Boy. We got lots of David Bowie and Tom Petty and Steve Vai and Joe Satriani. I mean, anybody can go get live photos. No one gives a flying fuck about live photos. It's the session stuff that I think where the real money comes in, to be able to get whoever. I don't even know what the new bands are these days. I don't shoot photos anymore. We try to get our newer photographers to do session, but no one wants to do photos. There's no, getting Beyonce or Jay-Z or Taylor Swift to do a photo shoot or whatever. Nowadays, it's impossible. Every big performer usually has their one photographer that they rely on and feel comfortable with, that they could have total control and total photo approval. And it's just, it's not like it was back in the day,
So if you're a photographer today and you're trying to, you want to license your work, is it easier or harder to do that now compared to, like, let's say back in the 70s or 80s?
Well, it's just different, okay? Because most of the magazine stuff usually go to photo agencies, because if they don't know you, they're never going to contact you. So how are they going to get to know Joe Schmo unless he's some brilliant photographer that, somehow his work's in front of the public eye and he builds a name for himself? When I started shooting photos, there was only about 4 or 5 rock photographers doing it back then. And I started when I was like 15, 16, 17. So there was hardly anybody doing it. But now there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I have this one friend of mine, his name's Igor Vidyashev. He's a Russian guy that I met. He lives in Toronto. And my friend who passed away, Baron Woolman, who's old school like Jim Marshall. Jim Marshall, to me, was the greatest rock photographer, if not one of the greatest photographers that ever lived. And Baron was like Jim, except Baron only shot rock for about 3 years. And one day we were on the phone talking, and he told me about this guy, Igor. And I went and looked at his photos. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's photos are amazing. His web is rock exposure, ROCK exposure. Okay. I looked at his photos. I'm like, we got to get this guy on Atlas. And he, to me, is the greatest living live photographer on the planet. If you put me in the photo pit with Igor, my photos would be 30% as good as his. The guy's brilliant. The guy, to make a long story short, he gave it a stab 3, 4, 5 years. We sold some photos there. He couldn't make a living at it. It almost doesn't matter how great of a photographer you are. It doesn't matter anymore. It's like, how cheap will you sell us photos for? That's more important to all the people out there. And I understand that everybody works on a budget when they come out with a Led Zeppelin reissue or a Quiet Riot reissue or whatever it is, or, in a magazine. They have so much money a month to put the issue of the magazine together, and they can't go over budget. So They get the cheapest photos. They don't really care how good or bad the photos are. They go for the cheapest photos, you know.
When we spoke on the phone the other day, you mentioned you spend a lot of time suing, people over unauthorized use of your work. What's the biggest misconception that photographers have about, copyright or owning their work or protecting their work?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is, look, every photographer, when they create their photographs, I'm not going to say create an image, but when they shoot a photograph, they own the copyright, period. But that's meaningless. So unless your photo, and I'm talking about, I live in the United States. I don't know how it is in the UK or France or Italy or Japan or whatever. But me living in the United States, yes, all the photos I shot, I own the copyright. But unless they're registered with the United States Library of Congress, which is the copyright department, it's worthless. So let's say a magazine or a record company finds a photo of yours and they use it, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to go after them because they use my photo of whoever. You can go after them, but it needs to be registered first, because if it's not registered before the infringement happens, you're going to basically get no money. If it's registered and then someone uses it a day after it's registered, then you could go for statutory damages. And that's where the big settlements come in. So just because you shot the photo and yes, you own the copyright, you have to register it to make any money or to really have a viable lawsuit that any written copyright lawyer is going to take on for you.
Have you ever come across a situation that was so outrageous that you just couldn't believe that they've actually stolen your photo?
Well, outrageous how?
Well, just like I tell you about my own little experience. I've had a photo stolen years ago. It was actually a photo of a bike that I bought. Long story short, I went to Amsterdam. I saw lots of Dutch bikes, which is a thing over there. I thought they were awesome. I went back to the UK, ordered one, and I took a selfie photo on that bike. It was a cool photo, nevertheless. Right. Anyway, 10 years later, 7 years later, I think. Fast forward 7 years. I'm married. I'm thinking, actually, these bikes are cool. I want to get one for my wife, right? I go on a website, and lo and behold, I see that photo on the website, of myself. And it basically says, sunny California. And I'm like,
or UK or Amsterdam, yeah.
And I'm like, my name's not Sunny. And I took that photo in Leighton Buzzard in the backwater of Buckinghamshire or Bedfordshire. That's not kind. Whoa, a whole lot of bullshit. Also, they've stolen my photo and used it on their website. Like, what the heck?
How did they get the photo from you? Did you post it on Instagram or Facebook and someone saw it at the company and said, "Hey, that's a great photo"?
I posted it on Facebook. I think that's exactly how it went. Yeah. That's the only thing I can think of. I mean,
So did you ever contact the company and try to get some money from them?
Yeah, I did. There's a calculator on one of the Photography Association websites where you can calculate licensing fees and stuff like that. So I basically calculated. It came to like £14,000 or something like that. I sent them, basically. I sent them a bill. They never paid, and I said
oh, they never paid.
No, they never paid. At the very least, they said, send me a free bike. If you send me a free bike for my wife, we could talk about that. None of that ever happened. They just took the photo down. That was it.
All right. Well, see, if it was registered, you could probably go after. Was it a big company? But see, sorry, but I don't know how it works in the UK. I don't know if there's a Department of Justice there that you register your work, like when you're a photographer. I don't know how that works in the UK. So the company was the company in Holland or in UK?
So I think, well, that's a good question. I think it's actually a UK company, and I think they were importing bikes from the Netherlands. I think that's kind of how it works.
Right. So the question is, who put the photo up, the importing company or the manufacturer? So there's a lot of variables. I mean, a lot of times I'll go sue people. It just happened. So on a Motley Crue website, which is owned and run by Motley Crue, I guess they license Motley Crue official licensing T-shirts and posters and stuff like that to a third party that's also on the Motley Crue site. So if you click merchandise on motleycrue.com, it goes to this third company site, and they had one of my photos that this third party company contacted a Japanese artist to do a rendition of one of my blood session photos. And to make a long story short, so it's like, can you go after Motley Crue? Because the third party company actually is the one who hired the Japanese artist and basically fucked him over too. And, there's a lot of variables. I let my lawyer basically deal with that. And honestly, like I said, I don't shoot photos anymore. I probably made way more money going after the infringers than I could ever make shooting photos in this day and age. Yeah.
Does that, when you win a lawsuit like that, does that feel like justice, or do you just think it's exhausting having to do that?
Look, I hate thieves. Okay, like someone works hard to go buy a car, and all of a sudden you walk out to your car and it's gone, or whether it's a bicycle, or you go to the trunk of your car and someone broke into all your camera equipment. Or I hate thieves. So to me, someone using my photos, which lawyers refer to as your intellectual property, that's no better than someone going into a market and stealing a bottle of booze or stealing a candy bar or whatever. It's mine. Okay, I shot it. I own it. You stole it. You didn't ask me, can I use this? You didn't offer to pay me. I have people that call me out of the blue. Neil, I saw this photo and I want to make an artwork illustration out of it. I'll go, okay. And then I say, send me a link to your stuff. And if it's an artist I like, I may let them use it for free because I like their work. But at least they contacted me and went through the right avenues instead of just basically saying, fuck you, we're going to steal your shit. There's nothing you can do about it. So
that's the thing. Like, I actually do quite a lot of work for free. I should say that, but I do. But I always like to be in the driving seat. I want to make that decision where I say, like, I really like this project. I want to do it. And maybe I'll do it for cheap or for nothing. But
right.
I don't. I also. I mean, I totally agree. I don't like people taking advantage and just using my. Do you think social media made that worse, or has image theft like this has this always been a problem?
Well, when me and Eddie, my partner Eddie Malouk, started Atlas, I knew there was going to be a lot of piracy and thievery. And my mentor, who was Jim Marshall, to me, the world's greatest rock photographer, one of the greatest photographers that ever lived, he was a brutal motherfucker, okay? And he used to go after people. He's the one that shot the Johnny Cash image. If you don't know who Jim Marshall is, go look him up. His images are amazing. I mean, he lived in a whole different time when it was more photo documentary. Like, he would go hang with Janis Joplin for 8 days. He'd go to the market with her. He'd drive in her car with her. He'd sleep on her floor. Same thing with Jimi Hendrix. Same thing with the Allman Brothers. Sort of like I did with the bands I hung with. But I was never a big sort of documentary, follow someone around or whatever. So what do you call it? I forgot where I was even going with this. Where were we going with this? Oh, okay. So when we started Atlas, I knew there was going to be a lot of piracy and thievery. So following Jim Marshall, he always registered his images way back in the 60s and 70s. And he used to preach that to me all the time. So I started doing it when we started Atlas because I knew my photos were going to be digitized. And, this day and age, you see a good photo, you could just right click it and steal most of the time. But even if it's right click protected, you could just do a screen grab of the whole page, or you could take it into Photoshop and cut out the picture you want. So even though it's right-click protected, if they want it bad enough, they're going to get it. So, but Instagram, I must have hundreds of thousands of my photos on there that people steal. The problem is most of them are from some kid living in his parents' basement that's got no life, no money, no nothing, no job. What are you going to do? Sue this kid who's got nothing? He lives in his parents' basement the lawsuits are $400 to file a lawsuit. The process server is $100 to have it served. It's $500 every lawsuit. Well, the kid's got nothing. Probably not going to answer the lawsuit. Yeah, you could get a default judgment, but what are you going to collect? Nothing.
Yeah, that's always a problem.
So but social media, is just it's another thing. I mean, like I said, even after Eddie Van Halen died on eBay, there's probably 200 or 300 of my Eddie Van Halen item, but eBay's got something called the Vero VERO program, and I belong to it. So when I log into eBay, I see the normal thing. But at the very bottom, I got something extra that says, I want to report this item. So you hit the box and it takes you another screen and you put a check mark why you want to report it. I've had thousands and thousands of illegal bootleg products with my images on them taken down. And, let alone if I don't know if I'm losing money, I don't get any money. It's time consuming to do that. But with me, it's never about the money. It's always about the principle, period. So,
I mean, I bet your images must have been used on, like, I don't know, on mugs, T-shirts.
Guitar picks and the bootleg CDs, poster, you name it, everything.
So with AI and image generation, being the thing now, what's your take on copyright, like in the next 10 years? Is there, like, how is that even going to work?
I have no idea, honestly. I mean, like I said, I'm 70, probably in 10 years I'll be dead anyway, but my kid will own my archive and he's going to have to deal with them. But so far, honestly, I haven't really seen any of my images manipulated by AI. Because I know my images, believe me, some of my images are very unique, like my Van Halen or my Motley or Guns N' Roses even. So I haven't really seen any influx of my images all over Instagram or Facebook or anything being manipulated too badly. So I'll deal with it when the time comes. Some people I know like to sweep things under the carpet thinking they're going to go away. And as you know, my documentary is called In Your Face. Well, it's not called In Your Face for nothing, because I'm going to butt heads with anybody I have to butt heads with on this planet. I don't care who it is.
Do you think that, like, the concept of owning an image will survive given this onslaught of of like social media platforms? There's always another social media platform around the corner. Like if it's not Instagram, it'll be something else. It's TikTok now, it'll be something else in 5 years' time. And like imagery, it's an interesting. I tell you what, it's an interesting thing actually. I had a conversation about music copyright with my now 21-year-old daughter, right? And the interesting thing is, she grew up in the world of like Spotify and, Apple Music and YouTube and all the rest of it. And she just didn't get the concept of ownership when it comes to music. Like she completely just didn't get it at all. It was like, well, music should be free. It's art. It's like, well, but somebody's going to make that music. Somebody's going to write it and record it, and somebody's going to make a living. And if that artist can't make a living anymore, then they're going to have to get another job, and they're going to have to work 9 to 5, and then they can't make any of the music anymore that you like to listen to, and then you shoot yourself in your own foot because nobody's going to make any fucking music anymore, and but she just couldn't, she couldn't wrap her head around the fact that, that music should be free. Because I think this was in the context of sharing your Spotify account with all of your friends. And I'm like, because my point was, look, you almost pay, what do you pay for Spotify? Like $12 a month or something like that, almost nothing. And you get to listen to a gazillion songs, right, for absolutely nothing. The artist gets paid 0.0000001 cents per download or something, absolutely fuck all, basically. And then
can they download the songs on Spotify so you have them on something like iTunes, or you can only listen?
So you can download them onto your device. Yes, you must be able to download them onto your device because you can listen to it even if you're not connected to the internet. So them, but my point was like, now you're like to my daughter, I say, well, you're arguing for sharing your Spotify login or your account with lots of your friends so they don't have to pay for it. Like now the artist ends up suffering even more because now nobody pays for the money account anymore. And it was just I think the end of that discussion was I just couldn't get her to understand that actually there's actually value to that. And you know if I was to open a bakery, this is my example to her, if I was to open a bakery in our little town here, right, and I would basically give away my bread for free to anybody, John Paul and Ringo that came in and just go half the croissants, man, half the bread, just be good. I would stay in business for very long, and actually, I would have to shut down my bakery before long, and then nobody would get to enjoy the bread anymore. Yeah.
It's funny. I asked you about Spotify because my kid in the last few weeks, he was like, we were in Connecticut visiting his mom's family, and so he started working on a Spotify account that he's going to run because I don't do any social media. I don't go to Facebook ever. I really don't do. I did 2 posts on Instagram in the last probably 8 months. I got excited for 2 posts, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. So he's going to do it because he wants to sell prints. So that's why I was asking you about Spotify, but also getting back to photography. She was saying about free music and stuff like that. With photos in the next 10 years, maybe you just go like, and I don't know how A&I works exactly, but go, okay, make me a photo of Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. And then next thing you know, you have this killer print in front of your face of Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. I don't know how A&I makes these images, or make me a picture of a hot chick scantily clad. Got to be Asian, got to have big rack, whatever. I don't know how that works, So I see A&I on Instagram, but I don't know if it starts with a photo or if you just tell them what you want, and all of a sudden, right in front of your face, there's this there. I want a picture of a 250 GTO Ferrari, down the Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans. And I don't know, all of a sudden there's 250 GTO Ferrari on the Mulsanne Straight. I don't know how A&I work. The photography may become a thing, a prehistoric thing at some point.
There's definitely, I think for in a lot of different areas of photography, I think that could actually happen. Like take product photography, for example. Why would you, like, for instance, if you're McDonald's and this thing where you go to a place like McDonald's or Burger King, whatever it may be, you look at the big posters and you go, I've never opened a box and the Whopper in that box
actually, it looked like that.
No way. It never does.
It's amazing. One of my friends, you may even know who he is because he's got a restaurant in UK. Probably he's got a few. His name is Nobu Matsuhisa. He owns the Nobu restaurant chains and everything. And when I met Nobu, he was nobody. Literally had one restaurant, and he knew I was a photographer. So one day he called me up. He's like, "Daniel, couldn't you come in and do some sushi photos for me?" And he made all this food, and I brought my life. But I'm a rock and roll photographer. I know how to make rock and rollers look good and guitars look good, and I know all the rock and roll tricks that I knew nothing about food photography. So I shot them, and then I looked at the photos, and they fucking sucked because I didn't know all the food photography trick. Same thing like sports photography. If you put me in a basketball game or a football game or a baseball game, I wouldn't be able to shoot that because I don't know how to do that. That's like a whole unique thing. So food photography, there's tricks like to get the steam coming out and to get the beef patties to glisten and the cheese to look like it's really melted, even though it's been 2 hours since they made the hamburger. So every professional photography, but nowadays I imagine also you could just go into Photoshop and do whatever you want. That's the thing, is no one shoots a great photo anymore. They create an image is my viewpoint on photography. You know, it's really funny. So you go to a show now and you see maybe 30% of the people filming something with their iPhones, and you can watch it, and I'll be there being a photographer, and it's funny. I'll look at this guy's iPhone. I'm like, oh my God, that looks better than it does looking at the stage. And you look at this guy's iPhone, and those looks like shit. Like, you know, like the difference. And then you watch some other guy, and he's sitting here like this, and the iPhone's going up and down, you know, while he's rocking his. And then, but the real question is, how many of those people actually go back home and ever look at that footage that they shot? I mean, yeah, I mean, they're at the show. Me, when I go to a show now, I try to watch the show. I got no cameras. I can actually enjoy myself. I'm not worried about, okay, when's he going to move here? The mic's in his face. There's the lighting. There's too much backlight. So I'm trying to make up for my missed years and go see shows. I go to very little. So there's one band, Rival Sons, who I think is the greatest live band in the world. I love them. And I always go to see George Thorogood when he plays. I love George, but you know, I don't go to many shows, to be honest with you. But, you know, you were talking about film and everything. And, you know, nowadays it's so easy to edit and stuff like that. So
just, I mean, for me, I love going back to film, mainly because in terms of photography, you know, it's a weird thing. I grew up with being surrounded by film and, you know, the development process and the whole shebang, cameras and all that. But as a photographer, I never really got into that until really until the age of digital, you know. And for quite a few years, I used to think like, I always used to feel like a fraud, you know. I used to think like, you know, it's this imposter syndrome kind of thing where you kind of go, I wonder if I could do this on film, you know. Because I remember, you know, as a portrait photographer, my grandmother was a portrait photographer, and I've seen some of her shots from the late 1930s, early 1940s, I would say, or mid 40s maybe. And they're incredible. They're incredible portraits. They're lit really well, you know. They're sharp. The posing is spot on, you know. Everything's just perfect, you know. And I always thought like, well, I wonder if I could do that on film. You know, because I'm so used to the digital process, you know, the post-production process and everything else. And so for me, you know, shooting on film now is actually, it was a learning, you know, it's a learning curve. It was so fun though. And I think for me now, it's actually, I have an old Mamiya C330
that is up and down twin lens.
Yeah. It's yeah. It's
what is it?
Yeah, medium format thing. It's a weird camera. It's hard to use. You know, you look down into the viewfinder and everything's kind of mirrored. So you move one way and the image moves the other way. And you
really meant to move the other way. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to really get your head around it. You know, it's like it's not an easy thing. It's like an old car. You know, an old car. It's not easy to drive. It's not automatic. You know, you got to change gears. Everything's clunky. Nothing works the way you used to. But there's a certain beauty to that, you know. It's fun because it's a slower process. And for me, this is always the thing. You know, I shoot boxing events quite regularly. I come home with 16.
Wait, did you say boxing?
Yeah. I shoot. Yeah, boxing events. Yeah. So boxing and MMA, cage fighting.
Probably not a great camera to use for boxing street.
No,
not at all.
No, but the thing is, you know, with events like that, you come back, or I come back. You know, I shoot on average 1,600 to 2,000 images, right? Which is insane, really.
Digital though, not film.
Yeah.
You couldn't afford. Yeah, you couldn't afford to do that. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, on digital, you know, and that's the average, you know. And out of those 1,600 images, I probably deliver 800, let's say, you know, in the end.
50%.
About 50%, yeah. And that's not because it's not really, you know, because with modern technology, it's not because the other 50% are out of focus or anything. It's mainly because of duplication of shots, you know. You know, it's like there's only so many close-ups of one particular fighter you need in a, you know, in a collection of images. That's really the thing. But But the thing is, you're dealing with amount, like with numbers of photos. It's unreal. And for me to go out with my old Mamiya with one roll of film and spend an afternoon shooting 12, well, it's not really 12, it's 11 and a half, because the first frame on a camera never comes out right. So half of it's always fun. But I spent an afternoon in town or something just making 10 shots. It's such a different process. I love it. It's great.
I had to do a photo shoot with Nina Hagen once. I don't know if you know she had.
Oh, she's German. Yeah, for sure. I know.
Yeah. So I had to go to her house. It was on the beach out here somewhere, Malibu or whatever. And up to that point, I was doing shots with Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. And same thing with film. I'd be like, click, 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 and they wouldn't be moving much. So, at the end of the shoot, I'd have 10, 12, 15 rolls of film. I had to pay for the film. I had to pay for the processing. So when I did the shoot with Nina, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try to do just shit I've never done before. And I'm going to make each frame really count. Instead of click, click, click without her moving, I'm going to do click. Okay, let's do this. So we did the shoot. Sun went down. She was in the water with this dress. They're on Atlas icons. You could see it. At the end of the shoot, I was like, okay, thanks, Nina. She went in her house and I went to get my gear. And I looked at my bag. I'm like, wait a second, there's only 4 rolls of film in the bag. Wait a second, I know I shot more than 4 rolls of film. There can't be it. And then I thought maybe I lost one in the sand. I started looking around. I couldn't find it. So when I got the film developed, everything I shot was there. I just took more time and energy instead of like motor driving and wasting duplicates, triplicates, quadruplicates of everything I already shot. I was making every shot count and really doing a more artsy, fartsy shoot than by just, production line shoot to have a bigger quantity. And it was probably one of my really good shoots I did, actually. I mean, like I said, you could go see them on Atlas Icons if you want to see them, but you're saying to Mamiya, take one roll of film and go after the whole afternoon. That reminded me of the Nina Hagen shoot I did. So.
It's and lately, what I started doing is I'm very conscious when I'm shooting sports events. I'm very conscious of not overshooting, because the thing is, I get paid the same amount. I get paid for the event. So whether I shoot 1,600 photos and I deliver, or I get paid the same thing. So, but if I only shoot half as many and I deliver the same amount, I spend twice as long culling images in front of the computer and stuff like that. So actually, if I calculate it over the hour, I end up earning less or spend more time for the same amount of money. So it doesn't make any sense. So I've kind of gotten a little bit more like, all right, I'm going to make sure that I don't overshoot and I shoot less than I would have done. It's a great learning experience, though, But it's really easy to fall into that trap with digital. It's just because
so easy. Yeah. I mean, you can look at some digital photographers' photos, and it's funny because when I'd be in the photo pit, I usually got the whole show, but I'd look at a lot of other photographers and they got 3 songs and then they get kicked out. And I'd see these photographers shoot, they'd shoot like 2 pictures. And then they spent more time looking at the back of their camera and what they just shot, going, damn, aren't I great? Look at these. I'm fucking good, man. Instead of wasting their time, shoot. You don't need to, if you know what you're doing, you don't need to look on the back of the camera to see. So that's one of the reasons why I don't shoot anymore, because I don't want to be grouped in to this new breed of photographers that, like I said, 85% I don't think know what they're doing, So.
What's your advice to photographers today who think, contracts and licensing are boring, compared to the creative side? Because I get this all the time. People want to be creative, so artsy-fartsy, folk, rather than dealing with the actual business side of it. What would your advice be to?
Well, if you want to be artsy fartsy, I mean, business is business. Okay. So, I mean, back in the heyday, you'd never get a contract. Like now you sell a photo record company for publicity or whatever, you get contract. And the contracts are always written up not to help the photographer, but to help the person who wrote the contract. So But if you're hired to do a specific thing, I mean, me being a photographer, when a band came in or a client hired me, I usually would sit down with the band or the client and go, okay, what are you looking for? What do you want to do? Do you have any ideas? And they said, Zlos, just do your thing. We trust you. You know what you're doing. But a lot of times I was hiring you and they have a preconceived notion of what they want or what they're looking for. It's funny, back in the 80s, I got hired to do photo shoots and everything like that. And there would always be an art director involved. And the art director would come up with some concept. He wouldn't even talk to the band. He would come up with this concept. And then the day of the shoot, the art director would come into the photo shoot and we'd sit down with the band and the art director, okay, guys, like, this is what I came up with. We want to do this. We want you to look like this. And we're going to have this. And the band would go, dude, that's fucking lame. We aren't going to do that. Here, the art director spent a month thinking of this idea without even consulting the band. So I would always, even though I was hired by the art director of the record company, I would always do what the band wanted to do because the longevity was in siding with the band and being on their side. The art director, he could hire you for, and usually you were hired to do the project anyway because the band said, we want Zlos, not because the art director said, oh, I want to hire Neil Zlozower. He's a great photographer. It's like the band would say, no, we want Zlos to do it. And then the art director would just come up. So, I mean, look, contracts, you got to read them with a fine tooth comb because they will never help the photographer, period. The contract only helps the person that hands you the contract. It's never going to be in the photographer's favor, period. That's all there is to it. So if anybody's listening to it, you get a contract, you better read it really good and make sure it never says this is a work for hire contract, which means they own your copyright. If it says work for hire, or if it says, well, you relinquish all your copyright to the work and we now own it, never sign that, period. Go on.
How much pulling power did you have, back in the day? Like, could you basically say to to art directors or to the record company, well, basically, we're doing it on my terms or we're not doing it at all? Like, how did that work back then?
I would never put it that way. But I would just maybe say, look, I'm not going to sign this. You got to make, revisions on the guy. I'd still do it. I mean, we just got a contract 2 days ago. They're doing a Randy Rhoads documentary, and we got them stupid fucking retarded contract that was just ridiculous. And for what they want to pay for each photo, we aren't going to sign it the way it is. So we shoved it back in their face and said, nope, 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 nope. We didn't get it back yet saying, okay, we're going to go with your stuff. But we know they can't get those photos anywhere else. So they're either going to do it our way or else they're going to have to go look for other Randy Rhoads photos from other people. But we have probably the best Randy Rhoads photos in the world, if you ask me. So if they want those, we're going to have to do it our way.
Do you find that there's like sort of a, what's the word? Like a trend when it comes to, certain images? Like, for instance, what I'm trying to say is like, when, we talked about Eddie Van Halen earlier, who passed away a couple of years ago. Well, Ozzy just passed away even yesterday. Do you find that there's sort of an increase in demand for images when these things happen, for example?
There may be for a bit, but usually when that happens, those are news items. They need the photos like in 10 minutes, okay? Because they want to be the first, on the online sites to break the stuff. Maybe like Classic Rock will do an Ozzy special issue in a month in a printed man. There's not a lot of printed rock and roll magazines anymore. I mean, that's all. Why would you want to spend money to have a magazine printed that you have to get your distributor 50%? You got to print it, okay? So it costs money for the printing. The paper costs money. The ink costs money. You got to pay the photographer, and then it's got to go to the printer. The printer, it makes money. Once it's printed, you got to get it to the newsstands. So trucks have to deliver it to the newsstands. The people driving the trucks get money. The newsstands take whatever they take. And I remember once I was at the NAMM show, I told you it's this big thing they have every January where all the music vendors go to in Anaheim. And this new magazine was coming out with their very first issue. And they were going to have this big booth at the NAMM show that cost them thousands of dollars. So I go to their booth at the NAMM show. They didn't have the new magazine. I go, what happened? They go, well, there was an incredible, really bad winter in the Midwest in the United States that year. The truckers couldn't get the magazines anywhere. The truckers they couldn't get them anywhere. They couldn't drive the magazines out to California. They couldn't get them to the newsstand. So this whole thing, they spent thousands on a booth at big hoopla party. There was no magazines to back it up. So online, they could put together anything instantaneous within seconds. Ozzy died yesterday. There were probably 1,000 different websites and media news outlets that had stuff on Ozzy within minutes of the news breaking that Ozzy died.
Definitely, my phone was a flood with images, like pretty much instantaneously. Yeah,
right, exactly. So it's a whole different world out there than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah. If you could rewrite the rules of photography rights, in 2025, what would that look like?
Photography routes?
Rights.
Oh, rights.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say is, look, the photographer owns the rights to their photos. They should have to be registered to sue someone. And obviously, someone using your images without paying you or asking you permission and just stealing them is, thievery, and it should be punished accordingly, whether it's being thrown in jail or whether it's paying a hefty amount of money,
So after so many decades in the industry, what do you want your legacy to be as a photographer?
Well, I don't know. The Neil Zlozower that shot all those iconic photos of Molly and Guns N' Roses and Led Zeppelin and Stones. I mean, that's a different person than you're talking to right now. I don't even remember those days, to be honest with you, because that was just another part of my life. I mean, people go through different phases in their life throughout their years. I mean, my phase now, the things that interest me, that my life revolves around, honestly, is cars and motorcycles. I still come to work every day here, license photos, talk to clients on the phone, but I never push my artwork. I sell prints to collectors. I have prints in certain galleries around the world. I don't go chasing money like I used to in the old days. I'm pretty comfortable. I own this building I'm sitting in. I own my condo that I live in. I got cars. I got motorcycles. I'm basically happy. I don't need to kill myself. A lot of people go through life. I mean, there was a time, if I could do 4 sessions a day and make as much money as I can, I would have. Like I said, I don't even want to ever pick up a camera again now. I just want to, I come here, usually I'm here in my office at 9. I leave here usually 2:30, go home, walk my dog, who's basically, I consider my girlfriend. I got her from Pussycat over here, who passed away. It was one of my best friends in the world. She left us too soon. And, I sleep with that dog every night. The dog hogs my pillow left to right. I got a little bit of this pillow. I wake up with a neck ache every morning. Dog's English bulldog. It snores and farts. That's like my girlfriend. And that makes me happy. And I watch TV. I'm in bed by 9 o'clock. I don't really go out. I don't want to hang with a lot of people. I make dinner almost every night at home. I live a very modest life right now, other than having all my cars and motorcycles. I don't travel. I have no desire to travel anywhere. If I can't drive there, I don't want to go there. I don't want to travel around the world. Been there, done that. Not even that many places, but I'm a pretty simple guy, to be honest with you.
Do you sometimes think about how much your images have served as an inspiration for people, to learn guitar, to get involved in music, to play in bands, because again, I come back to the very beginning of this conversation. When I said, when I watched your documentary, I realized that you literally, like, virtually shot the entire catalog of, of my childhood. From posters that I had on the wall to magazines that I used to buy and read as a guitar player. To the songbooks I learned from, to the albums I used to listen to. And for me, and I know for like a whole ton of my friends at the time, those were the inspirations to, get involved in music and play music, because those were the idols that you had when you were a kid. You look at, I mean, for me specifically, I look through your background, it's like, oh yeah, I know, those are I used to be well, I still am a massive ZZ Top fan. I'm just going to say that right now, for those of you listening or watching this, if you don't know, it is true. I'm a massive ZZ Top fan. I used to, I really got into guitar playing with ZZ Top. ZZ Top's Afterburn album was the first album I ever bought. I used to pretend to play along on a squash racket, basically. And I think I can't remember, it's my 9th birthday or something like that. A friend of mine, and some friends clubbed together, bought me all the ZZ Top vinyls to date, which basically was, when Eliminated and Afterburner came out, ZZ Top already had a whole career throughout the 70s, and released tons of albums. And nobody in Europe, nobody knew about that. Like, nobody known, until they came out with Eliminated, nobody ever heard of them over here in Europe. And, we only knew ZZ Top as like the guys with beards, right? But I got into the earlier stuff, into the stuff from the 70s, and everything from the first album to Deguello to all of that kind of stuff.
Rio Grande.
Yeah.
I know it all. The live record, I forgot
Yeah.
this. The live,
Yeah.
they're all great.
Fandango, the whole shebang.
That was the live one.
Yeah. And what I used to do was, I tell you what I used to do, because we're talking vinyl here. Back in the day, I mean, when I was a kid, CDs were already a thing, but I used to have. My dad had this record player, and I used to have lots of vinyl. My dad used to have a vinyl record collection, and so I got all these ZZ Top vinyls. And what I do was, you couldn't easily slow things down. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't like, computer where you could just change the tempo and you can learn a guitar solo. I used to I put the record on the record player, and I put a beer stein, like a big old German beer glass,
To weigh it down.
Exactly. And then I put another ashtray on the top of it to really slow it down. Then I would figure out, because obviously the pitch drops, so I'd figure out, so I'd learn that solo, lower down the neck, and then, I'd speed it up again, figure out what the key was, and then I'd play. That's how I used to learn solos back in the day. And I used to learn all the ZZ Top solos, left, right, and center from all of these records. And I remember my dad had some Hendrix records and the Moody Blues and like a whole bunch of, stuff. And he used to, at one point, he used to come and he could play. He was like, I don't know what's going on, but whenever I listen to a record, by the time it comes to the guitar solo, it all starts to wobble like crazy. It's just because I used to basically run out the grooves on there. But yeah, so I look at your back catalog, and it's like, I've seen these pictures a million times, every time when I pick up a guitar, from, and then later on, obviously Van Halen, Steve Vai, Satriani, it's literally, it's literally my, development as a musician, really, that's laid out. So, it's an unbelievable pleasure to have you on the show and talk to you about all those images.
Well, it's been a good, like I said, I don't do many interviews these days because I've said everything a million times, but you sent me those questions. I thought they were really good. So I agreed to do this, and it's been fun. We've been talking for, what did we start, 11:30?
Yeah, it's
an hour and 47 minutes or whatever, but that was fun. I had a good time. Yeah,
cool.
It was a different interview than most of them because everybody hears the same thing. I mean, all you have to do is watch my documentary, which, like I said, Declan and Beata at Rattlesnake Productions, they did a great job on my documentary. And, I've had an interesting life. And honestly, I'm surprised I'm still alive, because if you knew me in my heyday, I never thought I'd make it past 30. But the reason I think I've lived so long is because if you know how many kids or people came up to me, it's like, man, when I was growing up, I had your pictures all on the wall, and man, I had this poster and that poster and this album, and I used to stare at that. And that's what made me become a guitarist or a drummer or a bass player like Dave Ellison did. You know how many times you got me laid with those photos that you shot of me and stuff like that. So, I think I've brought a lot of happiness and joy to a lot of different people. And, I know what I did in my past, and, I've had a pretty successful career, and, everything changes. Nothing stays the same, like Buddha taught me. So now I'm just, I'm a different guy than the guy who shot those photos. The music industry is a piece of shit. There's no camaraderie, and there's it's just a stab in the back, ruthless business. Everybody cares only about themselves, and I don't want to be involved with that anymore. Being a Buddhist, I like to have compassion and empathy, and there's none of that in this business. It's a dirty, filthy, cutthroat business, and no one cares about photographers or photography anymore. I hate to say that. The questions you wrote me were so unique, and I go, yeah, this guy put some thought into this. Okay, I'll do this. I think it'll be a fun interview, and I've had a great time talking to you.
Okay, folks, that is it for today's episode. Huge thanks to Neil Zlozower for joining us and dropping some serious truth bombs about protecting your work, copyright, and what it really takes to survive as a photographer in 2025. Before you go, make sure you sign up for our newsletter at camerashakepodcast.com for photography tips, upcoming goodies, and more. It's free and it's packed with value, let me tell you. You don't want to miss that. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting the show on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake. Every coffee helps us keep creating more great content for you. And if you're listening on audio, did you know that there's a full video version of this conversation on YouTube? Just search for Camera Shake Podcast. You'll find this episode and all the past ones there. If you're already on YouTube, drop us a comment, hit that like button, ring the bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach photographers around the world. Remember, we drop a new episode every Thursday, so make sure you mark that in your calendars, diaries, whatever your kids use these days. Until next time, keep shooting, keep learning, and keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.